What's going on YouTube? In this video we're going to cover a couple things. We're going to talk about drag and drop for jQuery, for HTML5, for HTML4, and everything else that we cannot cover through the native WebDriver calls. We'll talk about how to use JQuery, which is image recognition tool to do our drag and drop, which will allow you to do drag and drop within the browser and from the desktop to the browser, and we'll actually cover all the examples for each of those topics. So let's go ahead and start with jQuery. This is the, if you're testing a website and its draggable components are built with jQuery, then you're in luck, because you can just use the native built-in drag and drop functions of WebDriver, and there are two options that you have. If you look over here, for both options we use action chains, and they're pretty similar in a way. So we import action chains from WebDriver, we pass in the driver that we created here, and we call drag and drop. Very simple, right? We pass in the draggable, which is the object that we want to drag on the page, and then we pass in the droppable, which is the object where we want to drop the draggable object to, and then we call the perform function, which will go ahead and run everything prior to the perform function. Now, option 2, which also will work, is you can explicitly chain the calls that drag and drop uses behind the scenes, which is click and hold. Again, you pass in the draggable, then you pass in the element where you want to move to, which is your droppable, and then you need to release the draggable so it drops it onto the droppable, and then you call the perform on it. Alright, so very simple. This will work with jQuery draggable components. So let's go ahead and execute this. And it's going to go onto a jQuery page where these two lists are created using the jQuery. So what we have here is two lists. We have sortable 1 and sortable 2. So what it did is it dragged the first item over, and then it dragged the second item over using the two different options that we had here. So this is one way to do drag and drop with jQuery. Now this will not work on a different website. If I actually go to this website and I try to do the same thing, I try to pass in the selector for this item, and I try to drag it over to this bin, it's actually not going to work, because this page is built with HTML5, which this doesn't work on, unfortunately. So we have to do something else, and that something else is actually a bit more complicated, but it is still better than using image recognition, because it still kind of goes through the native Selenium functions, and it is not going to be restricted. There's no limitations really to this. Whereas when you run image recognition, there are some limitations, and I'll actually go over those limitations when we talk about JQuery. So over here we need two different files. These files are provided on Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange, and I'll have a link. Actually, if you go to my GitHub and you look at these files, there will be a link of who created them. So Ryan Thomas, sorry man, I'm not gonna try to pronounce this, created this drag and drop helper, which is the main file that actually does the drag and drop on the page. So the solution for HTML5 is actually to use the JavaScript to do the drag and drop. So, and this is the JavaScript that can actually perform the drag and drop on HTML5 page. And then we need another one, because this script relies on jQuery. So we need another script that actually is capable of injecting jQuery into the page. So this is another code snippet that was found on Stack Exchange, and this snippet is able to basically inject jQuery onto whatever page you're on. Now there's a catch to this. If you look at this, it's not gonna inject jQuery if jQuery is already found on that particular page, which is actually good, because if the website that you're testing is relying on a particular version of jQuery and that version is already there, it's not gonna let you overwrite that, which can potentially break the functionality or some functionality of the page if you try to use a different version of jQuery than what the page was designed to go with. So going back, so these two files are going to be on GitHub, or you guys can download them yourself. I'll actually leave the links in the description so you guys can directly go to this sources and get the file from there, or you can get it from my GitHub. So now what do we do here? So I created a class for an HTML5 drag and drop. It has one function to drag and drop. Right, that function will use the driver. Mainly we need the driver object to execute a script. Okay, and then we also have here draggable and droppable, which are basically strings, selector strings that you pass in. The selector strings are they have to be in jQuery format, because if you look over here, we're creating a command to drag and drop using the jQuery syntax, right? So this has to match. So jQuery has to be able to process that selector that you give it. So I left a link here. You guys can check out the jQuery selectors that you can use. But this is, it's not as versatile as the native code, but this still can take, it can support a wide range of different selectors still. So this is still, the limitations of this is pretty small, but there are still limitations. You cannot use full-fledged XPaths on this, for example. So what we do here is, before we create our command, we're actually injecting the jQuery onto the page, and we're using internal function here to load jQuery, which also takes the driver, which we pass in through the drag and drop function. And you can pass in the URL for jQuery. For example, if you want to use a different version of jQuery for some reason, you can pass it in. You can just override the URL that is passed into this function, or you can change this default URL. So we inject the jQuery in there. We read the file for drag and drop helper, which is this guy, right? We get that as a string, and we assign it to this variable. And then we create a command for jQuery. So, which will actually simulate the drag and drop. This drag and drop is a function that is coming from this script, the drag and drop helper.js. Okay, it has a simulate drag and drop function here. Now it takes the draggable, right? So that's what we want to drag, and then the droppable where we want to drop it to. So essentially what we pass in here to execute a script is just a string. It's going to be this whole JavaScript. So let's take a look at how this works for HTML5. Now we're going to be using element IDs on that page. If you go over here, all of these elements have IDs. Let me reload it. ID 1. So hashtag 1 is the syntax for jQuery to find this. And bin, so hashtag bin is going to mean that we're looking at this element by ID and this element by ID. Now let's go ahead and execute this, see what happens. Whoops, wasn't able to drag it. One sec, let me run it again. So there we go. It actually took the first element and moved it over. So that's the solution that you want to use for HTML5, and big thanks to the people who provided those JavaScript files, because without those it wouldn't be possible to do this. Now, if you want to use a similar solution for HTML4, this will actually not work. Okay, and I'll show you on this HTML4 example. So here I'm using the drag and drop from HTML5, and let's go take a look at this page. So this is HTML4 page. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take the very first image and drag it to the very first input field, which is here, right? And then I should see something like this. Now, if I run this for HTML4, that'll actually not happen. It doesn't fail, but nothing happens. It doesn't actually drag it over. So, and if I do the jQuery example on this, it's also not going to work. So I have another solution to kind of solve this problem. We'll have to use Sikuli. So Sikuli is image-based automation framework, which means that anything that you see on the screen, Sikuli will be able to interact with. To get Sikuli installed, I have a video on my channel already, so check it out. It will walk you through all the steps that you need to do to get Sikuli working on Windows 10. Once you have it installed, I installed it on my C drive under Sikuli. Once you have it installed, you'll have files like this. Now, if you run this sikuliX.jar, this will open up the Sikuli IDE. You will need to create a script with this IDE similar to the one that I have in here. Now, I say similar because I have two screens, so I had to actually explicitly set the screen where I want Sikuli to look for the draggable. And what draggable and droppable are, this is basically the images of what I want to drag and where I want to drag it. So in my case here, this is the image that I want to drag, and this is the place where I want to drag it. So once you create this file, you can actually save it. Okay, you go to File, Save As, and you save it as whatever you want. Now I saved it under my E drive in the WebDriver Tutorials folder, drag and drop, as drag and drop.sikuli. So anything that is saved as drag and drop.sikuli, or whatever the name is, but .sikuli, it will be executable through this command line. So this is the file that you're gonna get whenever you finish installing Sikuli. So if you run the sikuliX.cmd and you do -r, you'll actually have the ability to pass in the script that you saved, the Sikuli script. And Sikuli script is nothing more than a folder with the extension .sikuli. Now, you can also pass in arguments. If you look at this, I'm actually accepting system arguments, right? Or which are nothing more than just a image file, okay? The image that I want to click, and that the image that I want to click is, like I said, is that I want to drag is this, and I want to drag it here. Now, this is where I saved my images, right? I have my droppable, which is that input field, and I have my draggable, right? So now I can leverage this function, which will pass in the draggable and droppable, which is just strings, a path to image. When I run this function, it will use subprocess to execute the whole command, okay? And then it'll wait for the command to finish, and it will return. So if I actually run this, right, keep in mind that we're kind of integrating Sikuli with the WebDriver here, right, in a way. There's no like real coupled integration. This is just we're using two different libraries, or in this case we're actually using a subprocess to execute something through the CMD. Pretty common. So we're creating the driver, we go to that particular page, and then we execute the Sikuli script. And I pass in the path to my image here for my draggable and my droppable. So when we run this, it'll take a while to actually find the image, and it'll take a while for the server to actually spin up for the Java server. But once it does, you can see that it works perfectly. Now, if the image changes, it'll actually stop working, because it actually compares pixels of the image to match the image that you gave it to the image that it sees here. So that's one of the downsides to this, is if something changes, if the percentage of pixels are going to be different, then it can no longer match your image. So maintainability wise, if your application changes in look very often, this will be very difficult to keep up with. It's not impossible, but it will get very annoying after a while. Another drawback is like whenever it does the drag and drop, for example, in this example, right, it actually takes control of your mouse, okay? Which means while it does the drag and drop, you cannot do anything with your mouse, or you risking interfering with the script. So you actually may cause a failure. It may not drag and drop where you want it. Another drawback is you have to have whatever you interacting with, it has to be on top. Okay, so you have to actually see the window. So if this was in the background, Sequoia wouldn't be able to see this image. Okay, which means you can't really run anything in parallel when you're using Sequoia, which is a huge drawback if you are building something scalable, right? If you need to build, if you need to run a lot of tests, and you decided to use Sequoia for your framework, you're not gonna accomplish it. It's gonna be very slow, and the actions themselves are actually very slow. The drag and drop itself, it's kind of slow. The Selenium one is much faster. Now you can speed up the drag and drop. You can make it a little bit faster by defining a region. So right now, Sequoia is looking at the entire portion of this screen, and it's trying to match pixel per pixel match on this entire screen. Now, if I cut that in half, right? If I define the region here, and I say only look at the left side of the screen, the script will actually run twice as fast. But still, it is not going to be scalable if you're going to be running something in parallel. This is less than ideal solution, but if that's the only thing that's available to you, you may want to fall back to it. So that's how you run that. Now, using Sequoia, you can also do things like drag and drop into, like, from desktop to the browser. Like, for example, we have this file upload services, right? And it's very common for them to allow you to drag and drop files from your desktop to their page, right? So using Sequoia, you can actually do the same thing. So over here, I'm gonna take this entire folder and I'm gonna upload it to this page, essentially. So let's see how that's gonna work. So Sequoia started up. It needs a Java VM to do this, so it actually takes a while for the JVM to spin up. So there we go. So using Sequoia, you can do things like that as well. Pretty versatile. Sequoia is definitely a great tool, but it's very unfortunate that it cannot run like in the background. It cannot recognize images in the background. So that's the video, guys. If this video helped you out, make sure to like and share. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. And as always, have a good one. Take care.